It's been 8 months since that night, since everything changed. And yet, I still wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, my mind replaying every second. Every choice. Every whisper in the dark. Every time it happened. 3 times. 3 times, I crossed a line I never thought I'd even walk near. And my son, he had no idea. I never saw this coming. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to do something like this. I was the good wife. The good mother. The one who held everything together, even when I was falling apart inside. But sometimes life puts someone in front of you that makes you question everything. Someone who sees you. Someone who makes you feel alive again. It started simple. A conversation. A glance that lasted too long. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was just lonely. That I was overthinking. But then, late one night, when the house was quiet, when my son was asleep, it happened. And once that line was crossed, I didn't want to go back. I know what you're thinking. How? Why? What was I thinking? But if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever craved something more, if you've ever wanted to feel wanted, maybe you'll understand. Or maybe you'll judge me. Maybe you'll say I deserved what came next. But I have to tell you, because this story, it will haunt me forever. Before I tell you everything, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga right now. Because this is only the beginning. My name is Catherine. I've been married to Moses for 16 years. On the outside, we look like the perfect family, a nice home, a good life, a son who's doing well in college. But inside these walls, inside me, something has been missing for a long time. Moses is a good man. A provider. Responsible. But love? Affection? That part of him faded years ago. At first, I told myself it was just life. Marriage settles. Passion slows down. It's normal, right? But after years of being in a house where conversations were reduced to bills, schedules, and what's for dinner, I stopped pretending that it didn't hurt. That it didn't make me feel invisible. We sleep in the same bed, but he turns away before I can even think about reaching for him. He comes home late, distracted, exhausted. He barely looks at me. I could wear the prettiest dress, do my hair just right, even put on that perfume he used to love, and he wouldn't notice. Or maybe he does, and he just doesn't care. Either way, the result is the same. I sit across from a man who is supposed to love me, and I feel like a ghost. Then there's Michael. My son. My only child. He's the light of my life. The one person who still makes me feel needed. But he's grown now. A man in his own right. He comes home when he can, but college keeps him busy. I've watched him pull away like all kids do. And I remind myself that's natural. That's life. But deep down, I know that when he leaves after a weekend home, I feel even lonelier than before. And then, there's him. My son's best friend. His name isn't important. But what he became to me, that is. He's been around for years, always polite, always respectful. A familiar face at our dinner table. Someone I never thought twice about. Until one day. I did. And I wish I could tell you the exact moment it shifted, the moment my mind started seeing him differently. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't one big moment. It was little things, small changes that crept up on me before I even realized what was happening. He's tall, athletic, confident. The kind of confidence that comes naturally without arrogance. There's an ease to him, a way he carries himself that makes him feel different. He's funny in a way that isn't forced. And when he looks at you, he really looks at you. Like he's listening, like he's interested. I didn't notice it at first. Or maybe I did, but I ignored it. Because why would it mean anything? He's just my son's friend. But then, one evening, something changed. It was nothing, just a small moment. A glance that lasted too long. A hesitation before he spoke. A way he stood close, not too close, but close enough that I felt it. And suddenly, I was aware. Aware of him. Aware of myself. Aware of the way my pulse quickened when he walked into the room. And for the first time in years, I felt something I thought I had forgotten how to feel. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was lonely and my mind was playing tricks on me. That he was young and I was nothing more than his friend's mother. But the way he looked at me, it was different now. And I knew, deep down, that I wasn't imagining anything. It happened on a night that should have been like any other. We had a small gathering at the house, just a casual evening, nothing special. Michael had invited a few friends over, and like always, his best friend was one of them. The house was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the low hum of music in the background. For a little while, I forgot about the emptiness I usually carried. I laughed when they joked, smiled when I was supposed to. I played the role I always played, the good mother, the accommodating wife. But even then, I felt it. The weight of his eyes on me. The way his presence felt different now, charged in a way I couldn't explain. By the time the night winded down, people started leaving. One by one, Michael's friends said their goodbyes, disappearing into the night. But his best friend stayed. Just like he had many times before. It wasn't unusual. Michael had already told me he'd be staying over. It was normal. Routine. But nothing about that night would stay normal for long. Michael went to bed first, barely saying goodnight before disappearing into his room. He was exhausted, and within minutes, the house fell silent. The only sounds left were the distant ticking of the kitchen clock and the soft rustling of the trees outside. It was late. I should have gone to bed too. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself in the kitchen, washing the last few dishes, lost in thought. And then, he was there. Leaning casually against the counter, watching me. There was something in his stance, relaxed, yet focused. Like he was seeing me in a way no one had in a long time. "You always do everything," he said, his voice low. "You never stop moving." I let out a small laugh, trying to brush it off. Someone has to keep this place together. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just kept looking at me, his gaze steady, thoughtful. "You ever get tired of that?" Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just a question. It was something more. Something deeper. I felt my breath catch, but I forced a small shrug. "That's life, isn't it?" He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Is it? Or is that just what you tell yourself?" I should have walked away. I should have shut it down. But I didn't. Instead, I dried my hands on a towel, turning to face him fully for the first time that night. His eyes met mine, and there it was, the unspoken thing between us. The thing we both felt, but neither of us had dared to name. The air between us felt thick, heavy. My heartbeat picked up, but I forced myself to act normal. "You should get some rest," I said, trying to sound casual, unaffected. He didn't move. He just kept looking at me. And then, he reached out. It was small. Barely anything. The back of his fingers brushed against mine as I set the towel down. It was accidental. It had to be. But my skin burned where he touched me. A sharp inhale. My body betraying me. He noticed. I know he did. Because his eyes flickered down to my hand before meeting mine again. And in that moment, I knew he was waiting. Waiting to see what I would do. Waiting to see if I would pull away. Waiting to see if I would acknowledge what was happening between us. I didn't pull away. The silence stretched between us, thick and loaded. And then, just when I thought he would break it, just when I thought he would say something, he asked a question that shook me to my core. "Are you happy?" 3 words. That was all it took. 3 words, and suddenly, every buried emotion came crashing to the surface. The years of neglect. The nights spent lying awake beside a man who didn't see me anymore. The quiet ache of loneliness, the hunger for something more. It all pressed against my chest, so full, so suffocating, that I thought I might break right there in front of him. I opened my mouth, ready to lie, ready to say, of course, because that's what I was supposed to say. But no sound came out. Because the truth was sitting too heavy on my tongue. His gaze softened, but he didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The moment had already shifted, the line between us blurring into something neither of us could ignore anymore. I felt my pulse in my throat. I felt heat crawl up my skin. I felt something dangerous flicker between us, something I should have run from. But I didn't run. I just stood there, drowning in the weight of what I wasn't ready to admit. That was the moment it changed. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just my son's best friend anymore. This was something else. And I wasn't sure I could stop it. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning, my body still buzzing from a touch so small, so fleeting, it should have meant nothing. But it did. It meant everything. And that terrified me. I kept replaying it over and over, the way his fingers brushed mine, the way his voice dropped when he asked me that question, the way he looked at me like he saw through every wall I had built, every excuse I had made for the life I was living. It was just a moment. Just a glance. Just a question. But why did it feel so intense? Why was my heart still pounding like I had done something wrong? I told myself it was nothing. Just a late-night conversation, just a tired mind overanalyzing things. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had imagined the shift, the weight in his stare, the heat between us. But the way my skin tingled where he touched me, that was real. The way my breath had caught in my throat, that was real. The way I felt something deep in my chest, something that scared me because I hadn't felt it in years, that was real too. And that was the problem. I turned over, facing the empty space in the bed where Moses should have been. He had fallen asleep in his office again, buried under work, too tired to come to bed. Maybe if he had been here, maybe if he had reached for me in the way I used to beg for, I wouldn't be feeling this way. Maybe I wouldn't be lying awake, my body betraying me, my heart racing for all the wrong reasons. But he wasn't here. He hadn't been here for a long time. I closed my eyes and forced myself to push it down, to bury it like I had buried so many other things. By morning, this would be nothing but a foolish moment I let my mind run too far with. I just needed to forget. But the next morning, I knew forgetting wouldn't be that easy. The house felt different. Off. Maybe it was just me, maybe it was just the weight of my own guilt pressing down on my chest, but something in the air had changed. I walked into the kitchen, and he was already there. Sitting at the counter, scrolling through his phone, sipping a cup of coffee like nothing had happened. Like the night before hadn't shaken me to my core. I hesitated. For the first time, I didn't know how to act around him. Did I smile? Did I pretend everything was fine? Did I acknowledge it? I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to come out steady. Morning. He looked up, met my eyes, and there it was again. That thing between us. That thing I couldn't name, but felt like a live wire sparking in the air between us. Morning, he said, his voice smooth, easy. Too easy. Like nothing had changed. I turned to the coffee pot, desperate for something to do, for something to focus on besides the heat rising to my face. My hands trembled slightly as I poured a cup. I needed to get a grip. Needed to act normal. But I could feel him watching me, and that only made it worse. Then Michael walked in, yawning, stretching, completely unaware of the storm brewing right in front of him. I clung to that, grateful for his presence, grateful for something to ground me back in reality. I focused on him, pouring him coffee, asking about his plans for the day, trying to pretend that my world hadn't tilted slightly off its axis last night. But even as I spoke, even as I forced normalcy into my voice, I could feel the tension creeping under my skin. I stole a glance at him, at my son's best friend. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Michael, nodding along to whatever he was saying. And for a second, I wondered if I really had imagined it all. Maybe I had let my own loneliness twist something innocent into something it wasn't. But then, he shifted. His knee brushed mine under the table, just barely, just a whisper of contact. And he didn't move it away. My breath hitched. My heart stuttered. It was nothing, just a small touch. But every nerve in my body lit up like a warning. And that's when I knew I hadn't imagined a thing. Whatever this was, whatever had happened last night, whatever was happening now, it was real. And worse? A part of me didn't want it to stop. I looked at my son, oblivious, talking about his day, drinking his coffee, trusting me, trusting his best friend. And for the first time, real guilt settled in my chest. Not just confusion. Not just intrigue. But guilt. I love my family. I love my son. But why did I feel like I had just woken up from a dream I didn't want to end? Days passed. Then weeks. I told myself that morning was just a fluke, that I was making something out of nothing, that I was being foolish, reckless, ridiculous. I told myself it was in my head. But then he came over again. Michael had invited him, just like always. It was normal. Routine. There was no reason to feel nervous. No reason to feel my pulse quicken when I heard his voice down the hall. No reason to feel something tighten in my stomach when I saw him walk through the door like he belonged here. But I did. And the moment I saw him, I knew this wasn't over. Whatever this was, whatever had started that night in the kitchen, it wasn't done with me yet. Dinner was normal. Conversation flowed easily, laughter filling the air. I forced myself to act like everything was fine, like I wasn't hyper-aware of him sitting across the table, like I didn't notice every shift of his body, every glance he stole when he thought I wasn't looking. But I was looking. And so was he. After dinner, Michael went to his room, saying he had to finish some schoolwork. That left me in the living room, absent-mindedly tidying up, pretending like I wasn't counting the seconds before he would walk in. And then, he did. He leaned against the doorway, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "You always keep yourself busy, huh?" I forced a small smile. "Habit." He took a step forward. Then another. Slowly, deliberately. "You never just sit and relax?" I glanced at the couch. Then back at him. "Not often." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. Then, without a word, he walked over to the couch and sat down. He patted the space next to him. An invitation. A challenge. I hesitated. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But my feet moved before my brain could stop them. And just like that, I was sitting next to him. Too close. Closer than I should have been. The room felt different. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that pulls you under, makes you notice things you shouldn't. The way his knee was almost touching mine. The way his arm rested along the back of the couch, just behind my shoulders. The way his scent, clean, warm, familiar, filled the air between us. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the hem of my shirt, as if holding onto something solid would ground me. Then he chuckled, low and soft. "Relax. I don't bite." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I never said you did." "No, but you're acting like I might." There was something in his voice. Amused. Knowing. Like he could see right through me. And maybe he could. I should have gotten up. I should have left the room. But instead, I laughed. A small, breathless sound that I barely recognized as my own. And just like that, the tension cracked. Just enough for something else to slip through. "So," he said, stretching his arms out, his body shifting slightly closer. "Are you happy today?" It was a joke. A teasing callback to the question he had asked me that night in the kitchen. But the weight of it still pressed against my chest, stealing my breath. I turned to look at him, my heart hammering, and for a second, just a second, he wasn't my son's best friend. He was just a man. A man looking at me like I was something worth seeing. A man whose lips were just inches from mine. A man who made me forget every reason why this was wrong. The air between us tightened. Heavy. Charged. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. It was happening again. That invisible pull, that silent question hanging between us. The kind of moment where everything can change in a single heartbeat. I should stop this. But I don't want to. I knew it then, in that moment. This wasn't something I could brush off anymore. It wasn't something I could ignore. It was real. And it was dangerous. The silence stretched, and for a second, I thought, then, a door creaked down the hall. Michael's door. We both froze. The spell shattered. A sharp inhale, a shift in posture, a rush of guilt so thick it made my hands shake. I pulled back, putting space between us just as my son's footsteps echoed down the hallway. He walked into the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes, completely oblivious to the storm he had just interrupted. "Oh, you're still up?" he mumbled, yawning. "Thought you went to bed already." My mouth was dry. My pulse was erratic. But somehow I managed to nod. "Yeah, I was just about to." Michael barely reacted, already turning toward the kitchen for a glass of water. But I felt it. The heat of his best friend's gaze still on me. The way he hadn't moved, hadn't looked away. The way something unspoken still lingered between us, even now, even with my son just a few feet away. And then, it happened again. It could have ended that night. After Michael walked into the room, after the air between us broke, after we both sat there pretending like we weren't drowning in something we had no business feeling, it could have ended. I could have let it go. I could have walked away, erased that night from my mind, pretended it never happened. But I didn't. And neither did he. It happened a week later. Another late night. Another visit. But this time, something was different. Michael had gone to bed early. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around you, makes you feel like the world outside no longer exists. It was just us. Sitting in the dim glow of the living room lamp, the space between us smaller than before, the air heavier, thicker. Neither of us said what we were thinking, but it was there. Pressed against our skin, woven into every glance, every breath. I should have gone to bed. I should have left the room. But I stayed. I stayed because I wanted to. We talked. Not about anything important. Not about what was really happening. Just small things, memories, jokes, little pieces of ourselves that had no business being shared in a moment like this. And yet, every word felt like a thread pulling us closer, tightening the invisible rope that had been winding around us for weeks now. Then, a pause. A silence that felt different than all the ones before. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And this time, I didn't look away. His hand moved first. Slow. Hesitant. Like he was giving me a chance to stop this, to pull away before it was too late. But I didn't move. I didn't stop him. And when his fingers brushed against my knee, soft and tentative, I let out a breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. I should have said something. I should have ended it there. But instead, I reached for him too. Our hands met in the space between us. Just fingertips at first, a barely there connection. But then, his fingers curled around mine, warm, steady, deliberate. And I felt it like something inside me had just unraveled, like the last thread of resistance had snapped. He shifted closer. The space between us disappeared. I could feel his breath against my skin, hear the way his breathing changed, the way mine did too. And then, a whisper. His voice so low, so soft, it barely reached my ears. Tell me to stop. I opened my mouth. I tried to find the words. But they wouldn't come. Because I didn't want him to stop. And then, he kissed me. His lips pressed against mine, gentle at first, as if waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I leaned in. I let it happen. And the second I did, everything else, the guilt, the fear, the weight of what this meant, vanished. For that moment, it was just him. Just me. Just this. The kiss deepened. His hand moved to my waist, pulling me closer, like he had been waiting for this as long as I had. My body responded before my mind could catch up, my fingers tangling in his hair, my breath shuddering against his lips. It felt like drowning. Like free-falling. Like every locked-up part of me had just burst open, unleashed by the touch of someone who wasn't supposed to touch me this way. And then, the weight of reality crashed down. I pulled back first. Chest heaving. Mind spinning. My heart a wild, frantic thing in my ribcage. He looked at me, his eyes dark with something I couldn't name, something that matched the storm inside me. Neither of us spoke. Because what was there to say? We both knew what had just happened. And worse, we both knew what it meant. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake we could undo. This was a choice. And we had made it. Guilt slammed into me. Hard. My stomach twisted, my hands trembling where they still rested against him. This was wrong. This was so wrong. But then, why did it feel so right? He exhaled slowly, like he was waiting for me to say something, to decide what came next. But I didn't know. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that my lips were still tingling from his kiss, my body was still humming with the memory of his touch, and despite the shame curling inside me, all I wanted to do was reach for him again. I stood up. Fast. Too fast. I can't. The words barely made it past my lips. But even as I said them, I knew I didn't mean them. He nodded, but he didn't look away. Okay. But his voice held no regret. No apology. Just understanding. Just patience. Just the quiet acceptance of a truth we both already knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I felt it before I even opened my eyes, the weight of it, the shame pressing down on my chest, thick and suffocating. My body still remembered his touch, the way his lips had felt against mine, the way I had let it happen. I should have felt nothing but regret. But the truth? The truth was so much worse. Because mixed in with the guilt, buried deep beneath the shame, was something else. Something I wasn't ready to name. I forced myself out of bed, moving slowly, carefully, like I was afraid the night before was still clinging to my skin, like someone would be able to see it on me. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my clothes, my reflection in the mirror staring back at me with wide, haunted eyes. I looked different. Not in any way someone else would notice, but I did. Because I knew. Because I wasn't the same woman I had been yesterday. I made my way to the kitchen, my stomach twisting the second I saw Michael sitting at the counter, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of the secret his mother was carrying. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't even look at him. But then he walked in. He didn't hesitate. He didn't avoid my eyes. He just strolled in like it was any other morning, like nothing had changed, like we hadn't just crossed a line we could never erase. He greeted Michael first, casual, effortless. And then, he looked at me. It was only a second. A brief flicker of eye contact. But in that second, I felt everything. The pull. The memory of last night pressing between us like a phantom touch. The silent question in his gaze. What now? I dropped my stare to the coffee pot, gripping the counter to steady myself. Act normal. Just act normal. But I could feel him watching me. I could feel the shift in the air. And suddenly, I realized I wasn't the only one who had changed. The energy between us, the unspoken thing that had always been there, was no longer just beneath the surface. It was there, undeniable, dangerous, and sitting right in my kitchen with my son between us. I poured my coffee with shaking hands, praying Michael wouldn't notice the way my fingers trembled. I couldn't let him see. Couldn't let him know. But the fear was already crawling up my throat, suffocating, consuming. Fear of what? Of being caught? Of losing my family? Or was it something worse? Was it fear of the fact that a part of me didn't want to stop? Michael yawned, stretching as he stood from his seat. I gotta head out early today. Group project meeting. He grabbed his bag, barely paying attention to me as he walked toward the door. I'll probably be back late. My chest tightened. My son was leaving, and that meant I was about to be alone with him again. I nodded, forcing a smile. Be safe. My voice was too tight, too forced, but he didn't notice. He just gave me a lazy wave before stepping out, the door clicking shut behind him. And then, silence. I felt the shift instantly. The air in the kitchen thickened. The casual ease of before was gone. It was just us now, and there was no one to hide behind. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time since last night. He leaned against the counter, watching me. Not smug. Not nervous. Just waiting, like he knew I was the one who had to speak first. Like he was giving me the space to decide what happened next. I opened my mouth, closed it again. My heart was a wild thing in my chest, my mind screaming at me to be smart, to put this fire out before it burned everything down. But my body remembered. My lips remembered. My hands remembered the way they had clung to his shirt, the way they had wanted him. He tilted his head slightly. You okay? A simple question. A normal question. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Because now, every word between us held a different weight. Every look carried a memory we shouldn't have made. I exhaled sharply. This, I swallowed, shaking my head. This can't happen again. A pause. And then, the slightest flicker of something in his expression. Something unreadable. Okay. But the way he said it, it wasn't a promise. It wasn't even agreement. It was something else. Something closer to we'll see. I turned away before I could do something stupid. Before I could let my resolve crack. I needed space. Distance. I needed to remind myself of what I had to lose. And then, my husband found out. It happened faster than I ever could have prepared for. A single misstep. A moment of carelessness. A text left unread on my phone, the screen lighting up at the wrong time. Moses wasn't even looking for anything. He wasn't suspicious. He was just there, just close enough to glance down at my phone, just curious enough to see the message staring back at him. Last night. I can't stop thinking about it. I knew the second he saw it. The way his entire body went still. The way the air in the room seemed to snap into something sharp, lethal. My heart stopped. My stomach dropped. Time slowed, stretched, shattered. He didn't look at me right away. Just stared at the screen, his fingers tightening around the phone like it might break apart in his grip. When he finally met my eyes, I saw it, the confusion, the disbelief. And then, slowly, the rage. Catherine. His voice was low, too calm, too controlled. And that was how I knew. This wasn't just anger. This was something deeper. Something that could destroy everything. I opened my mouth, but what could I say? What excuse could I give? He wasn't stupid. He had already seen enough. The damage was done. The room shrank around me, the walls pressing in. My throat went dry. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it wasn't from desire. It was from something colder. Fear. Because in that moment, looking into my husband's eyes, I knew I had just lost everything. I sat alone in the bedroom, staring at the wall, my mind blank, my body numb. The air was heavy, suffocating, thick with everything that had just unraveled. Moses hadn't said another word after that moment in the kitchen. He had just left, phone in hand, jaw clenched, shoulders tense, like if he had stayed a second longer, he might have done something he couldn't take back. I had watched him walk out the door, my heart in my throat, knowing I would never be able to undo what he had seen. Knowing I had just torn apart the life I had spent years trying to hold together. And now, sitting in the silence of this house, in the wreckage of my own choices, I asked myself the question that had been clawing at the edges of my mind since the very beginning. Was it worth it? I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memories, but they flooded in anyway. His touch. His lips. The way he had looked at me like I was alive again. I had felt wanted. Desired. Seen. It was a feeling I had buried so deep, I hadn't even realized how much I had missed it until it was right in front of me. But now all I felt was the crushing weight of everything I had broken. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a betrayal. Of my husband. Of my son. Of everything I had promised to protect. I thought about Michael. My son. The one person who had never doubted me. The one person who had always trusted me completely. And now? If he ever found out, if he ever knew what I had done, who I had done it with, I couldn't even let myself finish the thought. The shame was too much. I wanted to blame something: loneliness, neglect, years of being unseen, unheard. I wanted to tell myself that I hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that I had just been lost. But the truth? The truth was uglier than that. Because I had known exactly what I was doing. And I had done it anyway. I pressed my hands to my face, breathing deep, trying to steady the storm inside me. But it was useless. The damage was done. And no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't take it back. So now, I ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have stopped it before it ever started? Would you have walked away that first night in the kitchen, when his fingers brushed against mine, and something inside me woke up after years of silence? Or would you have done what I did, let it happen, let yourself drown in something you knew would destroy everything? I know there are people out there who will judge me. Who will say I was selfish? That I deserve every bit of pain I feel now. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was reckless. But tell me, have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Have you ever looked at your own life and wondered when you stopped being a person and became just someone's wife? Someone's mother? Have you ever craved something so badly that it blinded you to the consequences? I know there are others out there who have lived this. Maybe not in the exact same way, maybe not with the same faces or circumstances, but they know the feeling. The ache of loneliness. The pull of temptation. The way one choice, just one, can spiral into something you never thought possible. So tell me, was it just a mistake? Or was it fate? Was I meant to meet him at this point in my life? Meant to feel what I felt? Meant to fall, only to crash in the end? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories, real stories, stories people don't talk about, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because trust me, this is only the beginning. Loneliness is a dangerous thing. It sneaks up on you. It whispers in your ear, convincing you that you deserve more, that you deserve to feel something, anything, even if it means breaking everything in the process. It makes you believe lies. That just one moment won't hurt. That just one time won't change anything. But the truth is, one moment is all it takes. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to betray my family. I didn't plan for this to happen. But that doesn't change the fact that it did. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. If you feel lost, if you feel unseen, if you feel like you're slipping into something you know you shouldn't, don't wait for a mistake to wake you up. Find yourself before it's too late. Because some mistakes, you can never take back.